Julie Van Dersen for Sandra Smith this morning. A lot to cover. Judge Kavanaugh expected to face a marathon round of questioning today, following a long day of objections from Democrats outraged over the thousands of withheld Kavanaugh documents and raucous protesters being dragged out of the chamber while Republicans defended the nominee. Watch this.
I welcome everyone to this confirmation hearing on the nomination of
Mr. Chairman.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Mr. Chairman.
To serve as Associate Justice.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized for a question before we proceed.
You're out of order. I'll proceed.
We cannot possibly move forward.
We believe this hearing should be postponed.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn. I ask for a roll call vote.
We're not in executive session. We will continue as planned. You're out of order.
Mr. Chairman, I appeal to be recognized on your sense of decency and integrity.
Here are the facts. Judge Kavanaugh is one of the most distinguished judges. Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to have this loudmouth removed. I mean, we shouldn't have to put up with this kind of stuff.
And on it went from there. Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy is getting set to question Judge Kavanaugh in a moment. We'll talk to him coming up here. But first, let's begin with Shannon Bream, live inside the hearing room. And Shannon, what do we expect today? Good morning there.
Good morning, Bill. Well, it gets substantive today. This is when they're really going to drill down on issues with the nominee, so you'll hear a lot more from him as he answers questions today. A number of Democrats have made clear that one of their priorities is getting him to answer the question of whether or not he thinks Roe v. Wade was correctly decided. They're going to push him on abortion rights, on presidential power, on the scope of the power of administrative agencies, whether he thinks a sitting president should or should not be subjected to civil and criminal investigations. Remember, a lot of legal eagles on this panel, including former prosecutor Democrat Senator Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut. Here's what he has said about Kavanaugh. He says, this judge is outside the mainstream. He is extreme even by conservative standards. His fellow Democrat senator in Connecticut also believes that there is a threat when it comes to guns and the NRA when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh. He says this, Kavanaugh is a Second Amendment radical. He likely believes that Congress can pass virtually no laws, that state legislatures can pass virtually no laws regulating firearms. Kavanaugh will get to answer those questions directly. But GOP Senator Ben Sasse, in his opening remarks yesterday, said none of Kavanaugh's personal views on anything should matter. This is what should matter.
The question before us is whether or not he has the temperament and the character to take his policy views and his political preferences and put them in a box marked irrelevant and set it aside every morning when he puts on the black robe. The question is, does he have the character and temperament to do that? If you don't think he does, vote no. But if you think he does, stop the charade.
So we'll see. It was very spirited yesterday, both on the dais and, of course, in the crowd. So we'll see if either of those things kick up again today. And it's important to remember there have been weeks and weeks of preparation, those so-called murder boards where Kavanaugh sits in front of people who act as questioners. I've talked to a couple of senators who've done that behind the scenes with him and say they've given him everything they've got and they think he is as prepared as any nominee could possibly be.
You mentioned the crowd. By my count, 61 protesters charged with disorderly conduct, 9 others charged with obstruction or what they call crowding there on Capitol Hill. Do you have a sense for how this security is working in that room, Shannon?
Yeah. Just behind me, right below the skybox, is where those public figures are able to come in and sit. People who have gotten a ticket and have stood in line, and they are surrounded by U.S. Capitol Police. There are numerous officers here, and they actually are trained just looking in at every angle at the people who sit in those seats. So the minute they see it switch from them, they give them a warning, and they say, if you continue, you will be arrested. Many of them continue to talk and scream, and they are taken out. It happens very quickly, Bill.
See how many are there today. Thank you, Shannon Bream, inside the hearing room. For more on this, let's bring in Louisiana Republican John Kennedy. The senator's with me now. And sir, good day to you. You were in the room. What do you expect from your Democratic colleagues today? Let's start there.
I hope we have better. I mean, yesterday, for me, was proof that crazy never takes a vacation up here. It was all pre-packaged. It was pre-planned. It was orchestrated. You know, kind of like a meatloaf lean cuisine. You know, you just pop it in the microwave and here it comes. I mean, it was a circus. And I think it was pre-planned all the way down to the protesters standing up and screaming. And I don't care whose side you're on. If you try to disrupt representative democracy, you ought to be prosecuted. That's part of the problem. These protesters stand up, scream, disrupt the proceedings. They're taken out, and many times nothing ever happens to them, and I don't think that's fair.
Well, let's see what happens with them today. On center stage is Brett Kavanaugh. What do we expect from him today? He will actually answer questions in about 25 minutes.
He will, and I'm glad we're getting down to it, Bill, because that's what this is all about. I don't know what to expect. I'm going to ask you tough questions. I have no doubt he'll be able to answer them. I've read most of his review articles, probably about 20-25% of his opinions. The guy's smart. He knows what he believes. I said yesterday, and I'll repeat it again today, here's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a judge who's going to try to rewrite the Constitution every other Thursday to advance some agenda that the people will never accept. On the other hand, I want a judge who will protect the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is there to protect minority points of view. Unpopular speech, for example. Just because the majority thinks you don't have a right to do something doesn't mean the majority's right. Sometimes the majority means just that most of the fools are on the same side. Well, so there's a tension there, and we need a judge who will balance that, and I think Kavanaugh's our guy.
Okay, all right, trapdoors can doom a nomination, you know that. You know, if you step in it, it could be trouble.
Yes,
you don't appear to sound like this is the kind of guy who steps in a trapdoor like that.
Well, not based on what I've read and seen so far. I think Judge Kavanaugh at this juncture, we'll know more after the hearing, appears to me to be just as able as Justice Gorsuch. And I called Justice Gorsuch, then Judge Gorsuch, a legal rock star. Now, I'm not ready to say that. The hearing's not over. I'm going to do my job. Look, this is the most powerful unelected position in the most powerful country in all of human history. There's no margin for error. We've got to be sure that he's the one, but I sure like what I see.
Yeah. At the same time, the executives from Facebook and Twitter will testify about bias online and online security. What could they say that would satisfy you and your concerns now?
They could come up with a solution to the problem.
What would that be?
I do not want government to have the say about what someone can say or not say on a social media platform. Some of my colleagues do. I do not. I want to see us set up some sort of fair third-party tribunal, sort of like ICANN, which assigns web names that we can all agree to sort of be the neutral referee. I don't think we can any longer depend on the social media platforms. That's not as much of a criticism as it sounds like. It's just that these are subjective evaluations, and we've got to have somebody make the call that everybody perceives as fair. That's not government.
We're watching them both, sir. Thank you for your time. Senator Kennedy, we'll see you in the room at 9:30 Eastern Time. Here's Julie.
Okay. Be there.
President Trump slamming author Bob Woodward after excerpts from his explosive new book, Fear, were released. Trump now pushing back, calling the book fabricated, and tweeting the Woodward book has already been refuted and discredited by General Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and General Chief of Staff John Kelly. Their quotes were made-up frauds, a con on the public. Likewise, other stories and quotes. Woodward is a Dem operative? Notice timing. Let's bring in Karl Rove, the former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. All right, so Karl, good to see you this morning. If a book like this were, let's say, to just have been released prior to our presidential election, we'd be calling it an October surprise. Is this a September surprise, as the president suggests, calling Woodward a Democratic op, given the time of its release ahead of the midterms?
Well, the only good news for President Trump is that he is only one of many presidents who have been discomforted by a Woodward book. There were a number of them during the Bush years. I've been taken by the very emphatic and very specific and direct denials by Secretary Mattis, by General Kelly, and by John Dowd, the president's former lawyer, who's in the book, the quotes attributed to them are sort of the highlights of the book, and yet they've been very specific in their denials. I'm confident Woodward has on tape someplace or in a transcript somebody saying well, these men said these things, but that's different than those men actually having said to him those things. And so, look, I think at the end of the day, Brit Hume had it absolutely right. If you like Donald Trump, you're not going to be convinced by this book. If you don't like Donald Trump, you're going to delight in this book. But if you really are not really wired into it, you're not going to be moved one way or the other.
He taped his conversation with President Trump in August after the two discussed the fact that he was never interviewed for this book, and there was a lot of confusion as to why and whether his staff members didn't properly get him to talk to Woodward. But when you look at the book and the inner workings within the White House, both Kelly, Mattis, they've come out against the book. They say that they never made any of the critical comments. The problem is that if there are taped conversations, those were anonymous sources. And how much credibility does this book come with, considering all its sources are pretty much anonymous or fired and could be considered disgruntled former employees of the White House?
Yeah, well, that's the problem with it. I mean, these books are built around people saying things, but whether or not those people's motives in reporting those things to Bob Woodward, you know, they might be suspect. And again, also it's a question of he said, and then I heard somebody say that he said. So Woodward is very meticulous about his sources, but simply because somebody says to him, well, I heard this, or so-and-so said that, is no guarantee that it actually happened. And there's a lot of score settling in these books. So look, again, I've seen these during the Bush years. You can't dismiss them all, but on the other hand, you got to take it with enough salt to give you a real problem at the doctor's office, because it is people settling scores. It's people, you know, and there are a lot of unintended targets in it. People trying to say to get it back at a colleague whom they didn't like, in essence, are then you know, hurting the president whom they serve. So
there have been past staff members, to be open here. Former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, he was told to have called the president a moron in a Pentagon meeting. That turned out to be true, and look what happened to his job. It's curious to ask what might be happening behind the scenes, tension perhaps between staff members and the president. But we're going to have to leave it there because, of course, we are on short time today. But, Carl, thank you very much for joining us.
You bet.
Bill.
You bet.
Alert back to our top story of the day. Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing will begin in a matter of moments. Day 2, he will take questions at 9:30 Eastern Time. And our special coverage with Brett and Martha begins right after the break.
How can we say...
Let the questions begin. You're looking live at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, day 2 for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh on Capitol Hill. And after a hearing marked by protests and political theater, it's really anyone's guess what happens today. But we're here with you. Good morning from Washington. I'm Brett Baer.
And I'm Martha McCallum. In minutes, Brett Kavanaugh will face direct questions from members of the Senate Judiciary Committee after a contentious, sometimes raucous, really, day yesterday during the opening statements. Today's questions could be even more explosive, in part because Brett Kavanaugh will at least now get a chance to go back and forth and respond a bit, Brett.
It'll be interesting.
We are back with our panel, who will be with us throughout this long day here in Washington. Fox News senior anchor Chris Wallace, along with A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist at Real Clear Politics. Shannon Bream is inside the hearing room.
And in New York, host of the Daily Briefing and co-host of The Five, Dana Perino. Juan Williams, Fox News political analyst and co-host of The Five. And Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, a cast of thousands today because we have a lot of questions to go through. Chris, let me start with you. Yesterday, we saw 70 protesters arrested. Today, the questions will likely be intense from Democrats. Democrats trying to throw Brett Kavanaugh off his game, trying to create an aha moment that changes the dynamic because, frankly, they don't have the votes.
Not yet, and that's what they're hoping for, is somehow to cobble together the votes. I think that the Democrats are going to go after Brett Kavanaugh on a couple of fronts. First of all, issues. They're going to make the case, certainly argue and question, although I suspect it'll be more statements and accusations and questions, that as the fifth vote in what will become a solidly conservative court, that Brett Kavanaugh is going to undo precedents, whether it's on abortion, whether it's on health care, whether it's on gun rights. I think you're also going to see some of them, we heard this yesterday, go after Brett Kavanaugh not as a nonpartisan judge, but as a Republican political operative. Talk about the fact that he worked in the Starr investigation of Bill Clinton, that he was there in 2000 in Florida with the hanging chads, that he worked in the Bush White House. And finally, just the fact that he is the appointee of Donald Trump. You heard Dick Durbin say yesterday, you are his man, and for a lot of Democrats, that's enough. I think this is an entirely political process. It's not a legal process. There are two things they're trying to do. At the greatest hope would be to blow up the nomination. And if not that, at least fire up the base and say, this is why we need a Republican Congress, so this doesn't happen again.
Clearly, Dick Durbin wanted to create a strong attachment between Donald Trump and this candidate. In conversations that I had yesterday, it comes up again and again that pretty much any Republican candidate would have had Brett Kavanaugh on his list likely, and he could have been in this chair regardless. Let's go to Judge Napolitano in New York. Judge, in terms of the possible vulnerabilities for Brett Kavanaugh, what do you see in the questioning today?
Well, I think they're going to go into a couple of areas, and this dovetails with what Chris Wallace was just saying. Senator Durbin is going to grill him on whether or not he was involved in giving advice to President George W. Bush on warrantless wiretapping and on what President Bush calls enhanced interrogation and what other people call torture. He's already said under oath when he was nominated for the court on which he now sits that he was not involved, but there's some evidence that's come forth which in Senator Durbin's mind might contradict that. The other issue, of course, that they're going to explore is Roe versus Wade. Did he ever express at any point in his career, political or judicial, any antipathy towards Roe versus Wade? Now, these are not just wild political areas. They are targeting three senators here, three Republican senators. They're targeting Rand Paul on the issue of warrantless wiretapping and torture, and they're targeting Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins on the issue of antipathy toward Roe versus Wade. I think it's a vain hope and it's doomed to fail, but the Democrats are going to give it a shot to try and pick off those three Republican senators.
Dana, Democrats will try to say that Judge Kavanaugh is a fierce partisan and he's extreme. Republicans will say, read his opinions. The nominee himself said, read his opinions. He's a judge who calls balls and strikes. They'll also try to humanize him today, and they're going to hope probably that he sticks to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, John Roberts answer, which is not a lot, to show how he's going to rule.
Well, and this morning we woke up to a story in Politico where I think it was 11 or 13 left-wing groups have told Senator Chuck Schumer, you are failing us. That they expect that the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to be torpedoed by Chuck Schumer. Here's a Senate Minority Leader who is in a box. He does not have the votes to block this nomination, barring some sort of unforeseen circumstance or a flubbed answer or something that nobody could anticipate right now. This nomination looks like it's on sure footing. Now, something could happen, of course. So Senator Schumer has to figure out a way to at least show the left wing that the Democrats are trying. But he's in a real paradox here because yesterday's display, the coordinated activity by the Democrats to try to disrupt the hearing, delay the hearing, the very planned protests that were in the back of the room, they don't come off well. And so when they get to talk about issues today, I actually think that health care is going to be one of the biggest ones. You see it come up over and over again in polling for Democrats that this is the issue that they think that the Republicans are most vulnerable on and the one that the Democrats care about most. So I bet you'll expect to see some of that as well.
Yeah. Juan, in terms of what we saw yesterday from the Democrat senators in the room, what do you expect we will see today? Are we going to see more of the, what some would call histrionics and others would call fighting the good fight, I guess?
Well, I think it was Lenny Kagan who said all these hearings are vapid and hollow exercises. And I think, again, what you're going to see is a lot of the kabuki theater, which is questions that aren't really questions that are loaded with political perspective and intended to trip up the candidate much more so than exploring his basis of legal knowledge. I don't think there's questions about the legal ability of Brett Kavanaugh, cited as well qualified by the American Bar Association. I think the question is about balance on the court, that he is filling Justice Kennedy's seat. He's filling Lewis Powell's seat. He's going to force this court into a situation where John Roberts, a clear conservative, would become the swing vote. And so this is going to be about balance. You know, Judge Kavanaugh, do you believe that you can be impartial? Why is it that the American people are losing trust in this institution? And politically, the Democrats will know that recent polling indicates this is a very weak candidate. Only, I think it was like 38% said confirm him, 39% said don't confirm him. Neil Gorsuch, his predecessor in that seat in the Senate hearing room, had much more support, including much more support from Republicans. It's kind of interesting. I think that the balance issue is going to be behind every question asked today. Can you be an impartial jurist?
Yeah, but Shannon Bream, who you've studied this more than many people, millions and millions of dollars have been dumped on Kavanaugh's head. He's the swing vote here, potentially, because of Anthony Kennedy retiring. That affects how people view him, obviously, before he speaks. You have seen him with the opening statement. What about this as a guy who handles questions? Do we know anything about him?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you hear these polling numbers on people who say they're for or against him. But you and I both know, we all know if you walk down the street and ask the average person who Brett Kavanaugh is or who the president has nominated, they don't know him. They don't know his background as a jurist or who he is. And certainly the preparation for him has been very tough. I've talked to a number of GOP senators who have done the so-called murder boards with him. They have talked about the fact that they've pushed him. They've made it personal. They've gotten ugly because they want to do that to help him get ready for this. So they say they feel that he's prepared. I keep thinking about the last man to sit through this, which was now Justice Neil Gorsuch. The two of them went to high school together. They both clerked for Justice Kennedy together. They're very close. So you got to wonder whether he's getting any pointers from him on how to wade through this. Justice Kagan as well, possibly offering some advice. She was the dean of Harvard Law School and hired Judge Kavanaugh to actually be an instructor there. So he's got a lot of connections to the court. He knows how this works. He's been thoroughly prepped. One of the sleeper issues to look out for today is the fact that he actually clerked for 3 different federal judges, including Judge Alex Kaczynski in the Ninth Circuit. And Judge Kaczynski had to step down last year, late in 2017, after a number of accusations in the wake of Me Too bubbled up from a number of women who had clerked or worked for him, describing inappropriate situations. I'm told the left is going to push Judge Kavanaugh on that. What did he know? Did he speak up? They're really going to press into that because it's been such a hot button issue. As far as I can tell, he has indicated that he never knew anything about what happened with Judge Kaczynski, but it's a potential sleeper issue that the left is hoping to score some points with today.
You know, we were told that one of the introducers, Senator Rob Portman, actually worked on the mock questioning with Judge Kavanaugh. Rob Portman has done that job for vice presidential nominees and others along the way.
You know, AB, when you take a look at the different political environment between when we went through this process with Judge Gorsuch to now, and now here we are sort of on the doorstep of a midterm election, how much of that might be weighing on Brett Kavanaugh's approval numbers at this early stage?
Right. I wanted to go back to what Dana said about Chuck Schumer, the minority leader. The pressure he's under comes from those polls that Juan mentioned. The left of the Democratic Party can point to these polls and say, why are you giving up on this fight? This man is unpopular. There's not going to be a slip up in his testimony. There could be a revelation. So something could always happen. This is a tight margin, not a lot of room for error. And so you can hold out the hope, like the judge said, that you could turn Rand Paul and Senators Collins and Murkowski. I don't think you can, those 3 Republicans. But there's always the case that something is revealed late in the hour. There is the case that these documents, many documents, were not produced, that there's a disclosure issue here. There is the case that super nice guys who are super qualified but have had sort of a partisan career are not entitled to a lifelong appointment to the Supreme Court. So those arguments we made. Democrats are going to be weighing this equation that you mentioned, because the midterms are around the corner. Do you let people like Senators Manchin, Connolly, and Heitkamp, who are in Trump landslide states and are up for re-election, fighting to get back to the Senate, do you let them vote for Judge Kavanaugh because that might help them get re-elected, or do you force them to stand opposed to him, hoping that generates more Democratic vote? That's a very tough call.
There are very few events that have this much drama, this much consequence for the country, a lifelong appointment on the U.S. Supreme Court. We are getting ready to hear from the nominee in questions. We're going to sneak in a quick break. We have a long day of coverage right here on Fox News Channel.
Jim is more of a dog person, but his wife loves cats. All right, he's ready. 1, 2. Go get it. Yes, Jim has had to compromise on a lot of things.
So how will this thing open today? Yesterday it was gangbusters right out of the gate with people piping in. Kamala Harris, the senator from California, piped up and tried to stop the whole thing as soon as it got underway. We are just moments away now as we see some of the senators starting to file in. Cory Booker has entered the room. And we wonder, Brett, just how hot and fiery this thing is going to be as it gets out of the gate this morning.
Do you think that as you look live there, Senator Graham and Senator Cornyn talking, conferring, you would think that there is an orchestrated effort, that they will obviously have different areas, especially the Democrats, that they will probe, and we've seen the major issues: abortion, guns. Dana mentioned health care. I think your executive power and privilege, and there will be a list of questions. Each senator gets 30 minutes on the first round to question, and it will also come down to the strict constitutionalist interpretation of the Constitution as Brett Kavanaugh walks into the Senate Judiciary Committee room, and how Democrats see this Supreme Court nominee and what he should do.
Yeah, you think back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, no foretelling, forecasts, no signs from me about how I would rule on any of these issues. And that really has become the norm in these hearings, where the nominee struggles to hold back any light that could be shed on how they would rule on any one of these hot button issues. So they're going to try to keep poking at the margins. There's Dianne Feinstein. She obviously, gun control is a very big issue for her. And here Brett Kavanaugh enters the room. Feinstein had one of the parents of the Parkland children who was lost at Parkland there, who tried to shake hands with Brett Kavanaugh, and there was a lot of discussion last night about how all of that played out, and no doubt she'll be asking some questions with regard to that.
Chris Wallace, as you look at this this nominee here, this has got to be a big moment. I mean, just in his life, to be able to sit there and field these questions, whether he's ready for this very moment.
Well, and there was a line, I forget who said it. It may have been Lindsey Graham, because he has a gift for memorable phrases. He said, this is the last job interview in your life, because if he gets this job, he is a Supreme Court nominee for life. Let me just say real quickly before this starts, for the Republicans, there's a completely different issue. You've heard about abortion and gun control and health care. What Republicans particularly like about this guy is his view on the administrative state, that unelected bureaucrats shouldn't be making law. Congress should make law, and they say the Congress is too lazy, so the regulators, the bureaucrats do it, and they want an end to that. And on that particular issue, Brett Kavanaugh is very strong.
By the way, we just saw Don McGahn walk in, the White House counsel, and he's obviously leaving his job eventually, soon. He's sitting there behind Brett Kavanaugh. There was this issue of the woman right behind Brett Kavanaugh yesterday that some on the left said was signaling white national,
which is stunning. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that floats around Twitter and social media and takes on a life of its own. She was a clerk, and she is an aide in this process, and she's next to Don McGahn, as you can see there. My guess is that she's going to be careful about, what possible signals her hands might be sending, because who knew that she might be sort of surreptitiously trying to signal something about white power. Did you know that yesterday?
No.
You spotted that signal right away, right?
Her husband's a U.S. attorney and took to Twitter to defend her, and it was one of those memes that just got out of hand. As we wait for the gavel here, there will be an order. We expect that Chuck Grassley will go first. There's 30 minutes for that first round, and he said yesterday he may go beyond that. He will then defer to Dianne Feinstein, the ranking member of this committee, and you will ping-pong back and forth from Republicans to Democrats. Let's listen in to the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman, Chuck Grassley from Iowa.
Good morning, everybody, and we welcome everybody back again, and especially Judge Kavanaugh and his wife, Ashley. Yesterday, each senator made their opening remarks. We also heard from 3 people who had the honor of introducing Judge Kavanaugh: Secretary Rice, Senator Portman, and Attorney Lisa Blatt. And we heard for the first time directly from Judge Kavanaugh. He made a powerful, compelling, and convincing statement demonstrating his exceptional background and qualifications to serve our nation's highest court. NBC News reported that Democratic members of the committee plotted with Minority Leader to disrupt the hearing yesterday. Democratic senators interrupted the hearing 63 times before lunch. In the audience, 70 people were arrested yesterday who were following their lead. All probably very constitutionally prepared to do that, doing what the Constitution says, the right of freedom of speech, but we also were able to finally conduct our hearing the way it should be conducted. Yesterday was just